I stopped funding my nephew's tuition after my brother said, "You'll never have kids, so it's your duty." The Sunday afternoon sun spilled through the windows of Rosario's Italian restaurant, turning the wine in my glass into liquid amber. My brother Mark sat across from me, his arms slung casually around his wife Diane's shoulders. My nephew Ryan, now a sophomore in college, was texting someone under the table, occasionally looking up to nod at whatever his father was saying. "Another semester down," Mark announced, raising his glass in my direction. "And all thanks to Aunt Catherine here." I smiled thinly, accepting the toast with a nod. For 3 years, I'd been transferring money into Mark's account for Ryan's tuition, $10,000 each semester, plus extra for books, housing, and what Mark called academic emergencies. I never questioned it. Family helps family, that's what our parents taught us. "Ryan's doing really well," Diane added, patting her son's arm. "His economics professor thinks he has a real future in finance." Ryan shot me a quick, uncomfortable smile. "Yeah, thanks, Aunt Kath." I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "You just keep those grades up. That's all the thanks I need." Mark signaled for another round of drinks. "You know, Kath, Mom was just saying how proud she is of you for stepping up like this. Not everyone would be so generous." "It's nothing," I said, though it wasn't nothing. My interior design business was doing well, but not so well that I didn't feel the regular withdrawals. Still, I'd never married, never had children. My apartment was paid for, and I lived simply enough. The thought of Ryan graduating debt-free made it worthwhile. The waiter arrived with our entrees, and we fell into the comfortable rhythm of passing dishes and commenting on the food. It was our routine, these quarterly family lunches where Mark would update me on Ryan's progress, show me his grades, and subtly remind me when the next tuition payment was due. "So," Mark said, twirling pasta around his fork, "any men in your life these days, sis?" I sighed. Another routine, my brother's persistent concern about my love life, or lack thereof. I was 42. I'd had relationships, some serious, some not. None had stuck. And I was fine with that, even if my family couldn't understand why. "Nobody's special," I replied, taking a sip of wine. Mark exchanged a look with Diane. "You know, Catherine, you're not getting any younger. If you want kids." "I don't." I cut in, more sharply than I intended. "I've never wanted children, Mark. You know that." "But you're so good with Ryan," Diane protested. "And you've got that nurturing thing going on." I took a steadying breath. Loving my nephew doesn't mean I want to be a mother. Mark set down his fork with a clatter. "Well, it's just as well, isn't it? I mean, at your age, the risks are—" "Mark," Diane hissed, but he waved her off. "I'm just saying, maybe it's for the best. Some people aren't meant to have a family." The restaurant seemed to dim around me, the chatter of other diners fading into white noise. "I have a family," I said quietly. "You, Ryan, Mom, and Dad." Mark snorted. "It's not the same, and you know it. Look, I'm not trying to be cruel here. I'm just being realistic. You'll never have kids of your own, Kath. And in a way, that makes it, well, it makes it your duty to help take care of Ryan. It's the closest you'll ever get to being a parent." The words hit me like a physical blow. I'd heard variations of this sentiment before, the pitying glances, the well-meaning suggestions about egg freezing or adoption. But never had anyone, least of all my own brother, suggested that my childlessness made me somehow obligated to fund his son's education. Ryan's head snapped up from his phone, his eyes wide. "Dad, what the hell?" "Language," Diane murmured, but her eyes were fixed on me, watching for my reaction. I set my napkin down beside my barely touched meal. My hands were steady, even as something cold and sharp crystallized in my chest. All these years, I'd believed I was helping because Mark needed it, because Ryan deserved a chance at a good education without crippling debt. But now, looking at my brother's expectant face, I realized he saw my contributions not as a gift, but as a tax on my childless state. "Catherine," Mark said, his voice softer now, cajoling. "You know I didn't mean it like that. I just meant that you're in a position to help, and I understand exactly what you meant, I said, my voice so calm it surprised even me. I reached for my purse and extracted my wallet. And I think you should know that I won't be making any more tuition payments for Ryan. Mark laughed, a short, disbelieving bark. Oh, come on. Don't be so sensitive.
It was a stupid thing to say.
I've had too much wine. I placed 3 crisp $100 bills on the table. For lunch. And no, Mark, I'm not being sensitive. I'm being clear. I've been happy to help Ryan these past few years, but I won't be treated like a walking ATM whose only value is financial because I chose not to have children. Ryan was staring at his plate, his face flushed with embarrassment. Diane was frantically trying to catch Mark's eye, silently begging him to fix this. Catherine, be reasonable, Mark said, his voice hardening. We're counting on that money. Ryan's future is important to me, I finished for him. But so is my dignity. And right now, I need some air. I stood up, gathering my coat. Ryan, this isn't about you. I love you, and I'm proud of you. But your father and I need to rethink our arrangement. Mark's face darkened. There's no arrangement to rethink. You said you'd pay for his education. You can't just back out because I hurt your feelings. I leaned down, meeting my brother's eyes. Watch me. As I walked out of the restaurant, I could hear Mark's voice rising behind me, already spinning this to make me the villain. But for the first time in years, I didn't care what my brother thought of me. That one cruel sentence had shattered the illusion I'd been living under, that I was a valued member of this family, not just a convenient source of funds. Mark would come around, I thought, as I stepped into the bright afternoon sun. He always did when he needed something. He'd call in a day or two, apologize, tell me some story about unexpected expenses or academic opportunities for Ryan. And I'd probably give in, as I always had. Except this time, something had fundamentally changed. As I walked to my car, I made a mental note to check my financial records when I got home. How much had I given Mark over the years? And where, exactly, had that money gone? I didn't know it then, but that cruel comment at lunch was about to unravel a web of deception that would change our family forever. 3 weeks passed without a word from Mark. No apologetic phone calls, no texts asking when the next payment would be coming. The silence was unusual, and I found myself checking my phone more often than I cared to admit. Not because I missed his manipulation, but because the quiet felt like the calm before a storm. I was reviewing client proposals in my home office when the email arrived. At first, I almost dismissed it as spam, a cheerful message from Westlake University with a subject line, "Thank you for supporting our scholarship recipients." I was about to delete it when Ryan's name caught my eye. "Dear sponsor," it read, "we are writing to express our gratitude for your continued support of the Westlake Merit Scholars Program. Your generous contributions make it possible for outstanding students like Ryan Jennings to pursue their academic dreams without financial burden." I blinked, reading the paragraph twice more. There had to be some mistake. I wasn't contributing to any scholarship program. I was paying Ryan's tuition directly through Mark. At least, that's what I'd been told. A cold feeling settled in my stomach as I scrolled through the email, which included a glossy newsletter featuring photos of beaming students. And there, in a group shot, was Ryan, identified as a second-year full scholarship recipient. My fingers hovered over my keyboard as I debated what to do. Something wasn't adding up, but jumping to conclusions wouldn't help anyone. I needed facts. Before I could talk myself out of it, I dialed the number listed at the bottom of the email. "Westlake University Financial Aid Office. How may I help you?" A cheerful voice answered. "Hi, my name is Catherine Jennings. I just received an email about my nephew, Ryan Jennings. There seems to be some confusion about his scholarship status." "Let me look that up for you," the woman said. I could hear her typing. "Ryan Jennings, yes, he's one of our top students. He's been on a full merit scholarship since his freshman year. Is there a problem with the recognition email?" The room seemed to tilt slightly. "Since his freshman year? Are you certain?" "Yes, according to our records, Ryan was awarded the President's Excellence Scholarship in May of last year. It covers full tuition and a stipend for books." My throat felt dry. "I see. And would his parents have been notified about this? Oh, absolutely. We send notification letters to both the student and their listed guardians. His father would have received the same package Ryan did. I thanked her mechanically and ended the call, my mind racing. Mark had known. He'd known for over a year that Ryan's education was fully funded, yet he'd continued to accept my money, $10,000 last fall, $10,000 this spring, plus several thousand more for academic expenses. The betrayal felt like a physical pain in my chest. I'd gone without vacations, put off renovating my aging bathroom, even postponed retirement contributions, all to help my nephew. All while Mark was, what? Pocketing the money? I pulled up my online banking and began scrolling through past transfers to Mark's account. The pattern was unmistakable. $10,000 each semester, with additional payments of $1,500 to $3,000 scattered throughout for what Mark had called unexpected academic expenses. The total made me feel physically ill, $62,500 over the past 3 years. My phone buzzed with a text. Mark finally. Hey sis, about our conversation. I think we got off on the wrong foot. Let's talk before Ryan's summer session payment is due next week. Dinner Thursday? The casual mention of another payment for a summer session that was almost certainly covered by Ryan's scholarship made something snap inside me. But I wouldn't confront him.
Not yet.
Not until I knew exactly what I was dealing with. I texted back. Can't do Thursday. Let's touch base next week. Then I opened my contacts and scrolled to a name I hadn't called in years. David Mercer, a forensic accountant I'd worked with on a fraud case involving a client. If anyone could follow my money trail, it would be David. As I dialed, I couldn't shake the feeling that what I discovered was just the tip of the iceberg. Mark's callous words at lunch hadn't just been cruel. They'd been calculated, a way to shame me into continued silence and compliance. But the silence was over, and so was my compliance. David Mercer's office hadn't changed in the years since I'd last visited. The same minimalist furniture, the same framed financial certifications on the wall, the same intense focus in his eyes as he reviewed the documents I'd brought him. So let me get this straight, he said, removing his reading glasses. Your brother told you that you were paying for your nephew's college tuition, but you've discovered the kid has a full scholarship. I nodded, fidgeting with my coffee cup. I've been transferring money to Mark for 3 years now. Over $60,000 in total. David whistled. And you never asked for receipts? Confirmation from the university. He's my brother, I said, feeling foolish under his professional gaze. I trusted him. Family fraud is more common than you might think, David said, not unkindly. Let's see what we can find. I'll need access to your bank records for the past 3 years and any communication you have with your brother about these payments. Over the next week, David worked his financial magic. I threw myself into my design projects, trying to distract myself from the gnawing betrayal eating at my insides. Mark texted twice more about meeting up, but I deflected, claiming a heavy workload, which wasn't entirely untrue. I'd taken on additional projects, partly to cope with my anger, partly to recover some of what I'd lost. When David finally called me back, his voice had that carefully neutral tone that professionals use when delivering bad news. Catherine, I've traced the money. Your transfers to Mark went into a joint account held by him and his wife, but within 24 to 48 hours of each deposit, the funds were moved to a separate account in his wife's name only. My stomach clenched. Diane wasn't on it. It appears so. There's no way she wouldn't have known about these transfers. The account in her name has been used for, well, not for what you were told. Tell me, I said, bracing myself. In the last 3 years, they've spent approximately $15,000 on home renovations, $12,000 on 2 luxury vacations to Bali and the Maldives, $8,500 on electronics, including a high-end gaming setup they gifted Ryan last Christmas. Wait, I interrupted. Ryan got a gaming setup worth thousands? He told me he bought it with money from his campus job. David paused. It's possible he didn't know where the money really came from. I needed to believe that Ryan wasn't part of this deception. but doubt had taken root. There's something else, David continued. Last year, there was a payment of $7,000 to someone named James Peterson. It's unusual, a cashier's check, not a regular transfer. I'd need to dig deeper to find out who this person is. The name meant nothing to me, but the amount was substantial. Can you find out? David hesitated. I can, but Catherine, have you considered going to the police? This is clear-cut fraud. You could press charges. I shook my head. Not yet. I need to understand everything first, and I need to talk to Ryan. After David's report, I couldn't sleep. Instead, I did something I'd never done before. I hired a private investigator, a woman named Sarah Kim, whom David recommended. She was ex-law enforcement, discreet, and efficient. Within days, she delivered a preliminary report that made my head spin. The luxury trips weren't just family vacations. Mark and Diane had been traveling alone, staying in five-star resorts while telling me they couldn't afford Ryan's textbooks. The home renovations included a wine cellar that cost more than my first car. But it was the information about James Peterson that truly shocked me. He wasn't a contractor or service provider. He was a former colleague of Mark's who had apparently threatened to expose some financial irregularities at the nonprofit where Mark worked. It looks like hush money, Sarah explained when we met at a quiet coffee shop far from my usual haunts. Peterson discovered that Mark was inflating expense reports. Your brother paid him off to keep quiet. The pieces clicked into horrifying place. Mark wasn't just stealing from me. He was taking money from his workplace too, and using my money to cover it up. There's one more thing, Sarah said, sliding a final photo across the table. It showed Ryan looking distressed, meeting with someone in a park. This was taken yesterday. Ryan met with Peterson. I couldn't hear what they discussed, but Ryan left looking upset.
My heart sank.
If Ryan was meeting with the man his father had bribed, it meant one of two things. Either he was part of whatever scheme Mark was running, or he had discovered it and was trying to understand it himself. I had to know which it was. I pulled out my phone and texted my nephew. Ryan, we need to talk. Just you and me. It's important. His response came almost instantly. I know. I've been trying to figure out how to tell you something. When can we meet? We met at a small park near Ryan's campus, neutral ground far from Mark and Diane's prying eyes. Ryan was already there when I arrived, sitting on a bench with his shoulders hunched, looking more like a lost child than the confident college sophomore I knew. When he saw me, his face crumpled. Not with fear, as I had dreaded, but with shame. My heart sank and soared at the same time. He hadn't been willfully deceiving me, but he knew something. "Aunt Kath," he said, voice breaking. "I'm so sorry." I sat beside him, leaving enough space that he wouldn't feel cornered. "Ryan, I just need the truth. Did you know about the scholarship?" He nodded miserably, unable to meet my eyes.
For a year now.
The letter came last spring. I was so excited. It's a really prestigious award. Only 5 students in my year got it. "And you told your father?" Ryan stared at his hands. I ran straight home to tell them. Mom and Dad were in the kitchen when I burst in with the letter. Dad read it, and then he trailed off, swallowing hard. "Then what, Ryan?" "He told me I could never, ever tell you about it. He said you'd been helping with tuition out of guilt because you couldn't have kids of your own, and that telling you about the scholarship would destroy you." Ryan's voice cracked. "He said you needed to feel useful, that it was the only thing giving your life meaning." Each word was like a knife, not just for the cruelty of Mark's lies, but for the burden he'd placed on Ryan's young shoulders. "I knew it felt wrong," Ryan continued, "but Dad said it was actually kinder to keep letting you help. That we were doing you a favor." He looked up finally, his eyes red-rimmed. I tried to believe him, but it kept eating at me. "Especially every time you asked about my classes or my grades or told me how proud you were." I took a deep breath. "Ryan, I need to know everything, not just about the scholarship." He nodded, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. "Last Christmas, when Dad gave me that gaming setup, he said it was from money he'd saved from overtime. But then I overheard him and Mom fighting about spending Catherine's money. The confirmation hurt, despite my suspicions. What else? The vacations. Dad told you they were visiting Mom's sick aunt in Florida, right? There was no sick aunt.
They went to Bali.
There are pictures all over Mom's private Instagram. Of course there were. I closed my eyes briefly, steadying myself. And then there's James Peterson. Ryan's voice had dropped to almost a whisper. I know about the payment, I said. My investigator found it. Ryan's eyes widened. You hired an investigator? I did. Tell me who Peterson is. Ryan took out his phone, opened a file, and handed it to me. Mr. Peterson worked with Dad at the foundation. Last year, he discovered Dad had been faking expense reports, claiming reimbursement for donor meetings that never happened. Peterson confronted him privately, saying he'd go to the board if Dad didn't come clean. I scrolled through the document, a scanned letter from Peterson to Mark, detailing the fraudulent expenses and demanding action. How did you get this? Peterson reached out to me last month. He felt guilty about taking the hush money when he realized Dad was still working at the foundation. He thought I should know what kind of man my father is. Ryan's voice was hollow. He didn't know that Dad had used your money to pay him off. And you met with Peterson yesterday. Ryan looked startled. How did you? My investigator saw you. He nodded slowly. Peterson gave me more evidence. Bank statements showing where the $7,000 came from, directly traced to your transfer to Dad. And he hesitated, then pulled a small device from his pocket. I've been recording Dad. For proof. I know it's wrong, but I needed you to believe me. He pressed play, and Mark's voice filled the space between us. Ryan, for God's sake, stop with the guilt trip.
Catherine's fine.
She's got more money than she knows what to do with. No kids, no real expenses. We're just helping her distribute her wealth where it's needed. Now, stop asking questions, or you can kiss college goodbye. You think your scholarship covers everything? Who do you think pays for that apartment? I felt sick. Your apartment isn't covered by the scholarship? No, it is, Ryan whispered. Dad lied about that too. I live in scholarship housing. The money he told you was for my rent. I don't know where it went. I reached for his hand. Ryan, none of this is your fault. His eyes filled with tears. But I knew. For a whole year I knew and said nothing. I let him keep taking your money. You were manipulated by your father. You're barely 20 years old. What are you going to do? He asked, his voice small. I squared my shoulders. I'm going to get my money back. And I'm going to make sure your father never does this to anyone else again. My parents' 50th wedding anniversary party provided the perfect stage. Mark had always been strategic about his deception, making sure our confrontations happened in private so he could twist my words later. This time, I was bringing receipts, literally, and witnesses. The celebration was being held at my parents' home, the large backyard transformed with twinkling lights and tables laden with food. I arrived early, helping my mother with final arrangements while my stomach twisted with nerves. Sarah, my investigator, had helped me prepare a discreet folder of evidence, bank statements, photos, Peterson's letter, and a transcript of Ryan's recordings, all neatly labeled and organized. Ryan arrived next, giving me a subtle nod. We'd spent hours discussing how to handle this. He'd wanted to confront his father privately first, but I knew better. Mark was a master manipulator. He'd find a way to silence Ryan or turn him against me. Public exposure was our only leverage. As guests began to arrive, aunts, uncles, family friends, I watched Mark and Diane make their entrance, all smiles and charm. Mark clapped shoulders and kissed cheeks, the perfect son celebrating his parents' milestone. Diane complimented my mother on her dress, a designer piece I recognized from Sarah's report as being purchased with my money. I waited until after dinner, after the toasts and the cake cutting. My father had just finished a heartfelt speech about family loyalty when I stood up, glass in hand. I'd like to say something too, I began, my voice steadier than I felt. Mom, Dad, your marriage has taught me so much about trust and honesty, about how families should treat each other. Mark caught my eye across the table and raised his glass, smiling.
He thought this was a peace offering.
Which is why, I continued, it breaks my heart to have to do this today of all days. but I can't stay silent any longer. I reached under my chair and pulled out the folder. Mark, would you like to explain to everyone why you've been stealing from me for the past 3 years, or shall I? The silence that fell was absolute. Every eye turned to Mark, whose smile froze, then faltered. Catherine, he said with a nervous laugh, I don't know what you're talking about. Maybe we should discuss this privately. No more private discussions, I said firmly. No more manipulation. I've been paying for Ryan's college tuition for years, except Ryan has had a full scholarship since last spring. You knew that, and kept taking my money anyway. Murmurs rippled through the gathering. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. Mark's face darkened. You're being ridiculous. Ryan's scholarship doesn't cover everything. There are expenses, none of which you used my money for. I cut in, opening the folder. Instead, you spent it on vacations, home renovations, and bribing a coworker who caught you committing fraud at the foundation. Mark shot to his feet. These are outrageous accusations. Ryan, tell your aunt she's confused. All eyes turned to Ryan, who had gone pale but stood his ground. I can't do that, Dad. I heard you confess. He pulled out his phone. I recorded it. Mark lunged for the phone, but our uncle stepped between them. Mark, what the hell is going on? For the next 20 minutes, I methodically laid out the evidence. The bank transfers from my account to Mark's. The subsequent transfers to Diane's hidden account. The expenses that had nothing to do with Ryan's education. The scholarship letter with its date clearly visible. Peterson's documented accusation of workplace fraud. With each piece of evidence, Mark's defenses crumbled. He tried anger. You're just jealous of my family. Then dismissal. It was a misunderstanding about which expenses the scholarship covered. Then victim blaming. You offered to help, I never forced you. When I played Ryan's recording, Mark finally fell silent. His own voice, callously discussing how he was exploiting me, left no room for denial. I've already frozen your access to our joint family investment fund, I told him as shocked relatives looked on. I've reported the workplace fraud to the foundation board, and I'll be filing a police report for theft by deception tomorrow morning. You can't be serious, Diane sputtered, speaking up for the first time. This is family. We can work this out privately. Like the private vacation to the Maldives you took with my tuition money? I asked coldly. No, we're well past private resolution. My father, who had been unnaturally quiet throughout my presentation, finally stood up. In his 80 years, I'd rarely seen him truly angry, but the look he gave Mark now was incandescent with rage. Get out of my house, he said to his only son.
Now.
Mark looked around the room, searching for a sympathetic face and finding none. Even Diane was backing away from him, her own position suddenly precarious. This isn't over, he hissed at me as he grabbed his coat. You're right, I replied. The legal proceedings are just beginning. 6 months passed like a fever dream. The family was split between those who couldn't believe Mark's betrayal and those who'd apparently suspected him of dishonesty for years, but never said anything. My parents, devastated but resolute, stood by me through every painful step of the legal process. Mark pled guilty to theft by deception as part of a deal that kept him out of prison but required full restitution of the stolen funds, plus interest. The foundation conducted its own investigation and terminated him once they discovered the extent of his expense fraud. That case was still pending, but his career in nonprofit management was effectively over. Diane filed for divorce a month after the confrontation, claiming she'd been unaware of the full extent of Mark's deception, a claim undermined by the evidence of her separate bank account and lavish spending. She moved back to her parents' home in Oregon, leaving behind the renovated house that stood as a monument to their mutual greed. And Ryan moved in with me temporarily, while he processed the implosion of his family. His relationship with his father was fractured, possibly beyond repair, but he was working through it with a therapist. He transferred to a university closer to my home for his junior year, determined to make a fresh start. Do you think Dad ever loved me? Ryan asked one evening as we sat on my balcony, watching the sunset. Or was I just a prop in his schemes? I considered my answer carefully. I think your father loves you in the only way he knows how.
He's broken, Ryan.
He sees relationships as transactions, people as resources to be used. It doesn't excuse what he did, but it might help explain it. Ryan nodded slowly. I keep thinking about all those years you supported me, believing you were paying for my education. You never asked for anything in return. That's what love is supposed to be, I said simply. Unconditional. I'm trying to be more like you, he said, less like him. My heart swelled. In the midst of all this pain, watching Ryan grow into a thoughtful, ethical young man gave me more joy than I could express. The doorbell rang, interrupting our conversation. I excused myself to answer it, finding my attorney, Hannah, on the doorstep with a manila envelope. It's done, she said, handing me the envelope. The judge signed off on the final restitution order this afternoon. Mark has 30 days to pay the full amount. I invited her in, and Ryan joined us at the kitchen table as I opened the envelope. Inside was a court order requiring Mark to pay me $72,800, the $62,500 he'd stolen, plus interest and legal fees. What happens if he doesn't pay? Ryan asked. Then he violates his probation and faces jail time, Hannah explained. But I suspect he'll find a way to pay. He's desperate to avoid incarceration. After Hannah left, Ryan and I sat in contemplative silence. The court victory felt hollow in a way. The money would return, but the trust was gone forever. What will you do with it? Ryan finally asked. The money when Dad pays. I smiled. I'm thinking of starting a scholarship for students from single-parent households or with difficult family situations. Full tuition, no strings attached. Ryan's eyes lit up. That's perfect. Can I help set it up? I'd like that, I said. We can work on the criteria together. Later that night, after Ryan had gone to bed, I sat alone in my living room, thinking about the strange journey of the past year. Mark's cruel words at that fateful lunch, "You'll never have kids of your own, so it's your duty," had been intended to shame me into continued compliance. Instead, they had freed me. For years, I'd felt the weight of others' expectations, the sideways glances when I said I didn't want children, the assumption that my life was somehow incomplete. Mark had weaponized those societal judgments against me, using my supposed deficiency as a means of control. But through this ordeal, I discovered something powerful. Being childless didn't define me any more than being a parent defined Mark. He'd failed as a father not because he didn't know how to parent, but because he didn't know how to love unselfishly. And I had nurtured Ryan through this crisis more effectively than his own father ever had. I'd shown him what integrity looked like, what boundaries meant, what unconditional support felt like. I still didn't know if I'd ever become a mother in the traditional sense. At 43, it remained a possibility, though not a priority. But I did know that my worth wasn't determined by whether I reproduced. It was measured by how I treated others, the values I upheld, the difference I made in the lives I touched. Standing at my window, looking out at the city lights, I felt a sense of peace that had eluded me for months. The wound of Mark's betrayal would always be there, but it no longer defined me. I had reclaimed my story, my money, and most importantly, my sense of self-worth. Being childless didn't make me anyone's bank account, and it sure as hell didn't make me less of a person. It just made me who I was, a woman living life on her own terms, with plenty of love to give on her own schedule, in her own way.